say they see me still be joyful, smiling, walking around, and that's how Paul did, and he's still joyful, he was praying in most difficult hardship. That's the most time, that's the time you really have to pray from your soul in your difficult hard time, and it was wonder, because Paul said they did him everything too. Talk about him, slander him, everything. But among all that, Paul said he's still active. He's still active by still being joyful, still smiling, still preaching, dealing with his ministry, still being active, doing everyday thing. When you being slandered, you being talked about, you don't just stay at home and cry in the corner. You got to stay active. We're going to use these tools that Paul said. You're going to stay active. You're going to stay smiling, being joyful, keep on praying, in your most difficult hardship. So I don't let circumstances or people, expectation control me. And that's another thing. They just like the three guys they didn't let the king control them. They refused to bow down. Jesus refused to bow down to the devil. Remember, after his fasting, all I need you to bow down, and I need you to remember that I could give you all this here. Only you bow down. And Jesus looked at the devil and said, "You get behind me, devil. You get under my feet." So we can't bow down to no false god, you know. And so Paul said, in circumstance or expectation, he didn't let it control him. He being firm, in his faith. He refused to compromise. And that's how the three guys was. And that's how Daniel was. Daniel prayed 3 times a day and told him to don't pray. He refused to compromise. We cannot compromise with the devil. We have to still stand firm on God's word. And that's what Paul is telling her. Paul said, I refuse to compromise, with the devil. Good report, bad report. Paul saying we should always rejoice, praise our way through. And that's what Paul did when he was in prison. Paul had praised his way through. He was praying and everything else. He saved someone that was in prison. They were going to harm themselves. Because they were supposed to do a good watch on them. And he wake up. Paul gone. Instead of Paul running, Paul stood right there to help him. Said, no, don't harm yourself. Paul was a righteous man. And see, that's what he was saying. You got to still have a good behavior, a good spiritual behavior when you're in your hard time. Because sometimes your hard time can take you out of character. So for Paul saying you got to stay in character, you got to still have a good spiritual behavior when you're in your hard time. Because sometimes the time can be so hard, it can take you out of character, just like with Job. Job was in this hard time. Job still was praying. Job still didn't allow nobody to talk about God. He even told his wife, you sit down, you're being foolish. And so in his hard time, Job was still being active because he was still praying. He wasn't taking baths and taking care of himself. He was still praying and being connected with God. Even though God was quiet, God wasn't responding to him until ultimately to him. Well, he saw that Job had enough. See, God know when you have enough. He know when you ain't got no more strength. He know when you're breaking down. And sometimes, he'll wait till you get to that point and God gonna step in. But he was still praying. He was still believing in God. And that's how Paul saying we got to be in our hard time. The main thing, we have to believe. We got to have faith. We got to have hope. Now you got to keep visualizing your hope. You got to keep God in your mind, in your heart, to keep that hope alive. Mine's have faded away so many times, and I had to keep it active. When you see it fading away, just put it back on track. Because without your faith and your hope, and you believe, you're going to just lose all kind of hope or keep on moving forward. So bad report, good report, should always rejoice. and praise your way through. You know, having nothing, but yet possessing everything. We have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and open wide our heart to you. So Paul sensed a great relationship between himself and those in Corinth, and he spoke freely, with them being directed, speaking the word to them. But here he uses a friendly tone, helping them to see this letter as a personal and wide and open. Now, Paul had love for the Corinthians. Now, see, that's another thing. Now, this is a spoken. This is a tool right here that we not gonna take on what Paul tried to do with the Corinthians. So us as leaders that God has sent out here, you're not gonna have everybody like you. Preachers. Just because you're a preacher, everybody not gonna like you. Now Paul wanted them to love him. So he used his love as a weapon, to see if they're gonna love him back, and they did. You know, uh, so we are not. So we holding our affliction, from you, but you are withholding yours from us. See, what he's saying. He's saying he loved them, but they never respond back to him that they love him. You see what I'm saying? He used his love for a weapon to manipulate them to love him back. Just because you're a leader and you're sent by God. A lot of times, just because you're sent by God, that don't mean everybody is going to like it. So there were affliction, withholding, but the disciples' lifestyle ought to be lived within the context of the Holy Spirit. Because you remember, Jesus told them, when I leave, when I'm gone, I'm leaving the Holy Spirit with y'all to guide y'all through. So as a fair exchange, this is what Paul was trying to do. He was trying to do an exchange. So he's saying, I speak as to my children. Open wide your heart also. So he spoke from his heart to them. So he wanted them to speak to him the same way, but then they felt the same way towards Paul. So Paul opened wide, his heart without withholding affliction from them. Paul had told the Corinthian believer, his truth of feeling for them, So he was so quick to tell his feelings to them, but did not return it back to him. So Paul confronted the Corinthians for withholding their love, but they had left their suspicious and contempt, their relationship with him. Instead of accepting Paul, they didn't accept Paul, they were becoming mean-spirited and hard-hearted. Paul opened up to the Corinthians how he feel about them, but they don't want to accept him, but being a stiff neck. Instead of them accepting Paul, they got meaner with him, because he was forcing them to love him back. And that's something, you cannot force someone to love you. You can't force it, because the more you try to force it, the more they was doing to Paul. They was being mean, having a mean spirit. So Paul thought he was going to have a fair exchange, to Corinthians. But he expressed his feelings towards them, but they didn't feel the same way, but being mean and did not accept Paul. So Paul represented himself and his co-workers to the Corinthians, but he offered evidence that they have not been false apostles. Now he tried to let them know, they're not false prophets, because most of the disciples came. Paul did not, but the rest of them came from Jesus. So he's trying to let them know, we're not false prophets. We the real thing, and they have faithfully represented Christ through every kind of suffering, and God's power had been obvious in through them. So power can, because Jesus said, I'm going to lead the Holy Spirit. I'm going to lead y'all some power. You're going to be able to sculpt over lines and everything. So they have power, to do certain things. Suffering in God, the power that had been obvious in them through from Christ. Now we also see no matter what situation, Paul let us know no matter what situation that you're in. Paul was in jail. And see, no matter where you at, it's no description of praying because if they don't want you to pray out loud, you still can pray. When I'm at work, I still pray in a spirit. Nobody can stop you from praying. They can stop you from praying and talking out loud, but they can never stop you from praying in the spirit. So he's saying no matter where you at, we see that Paul was in jail. Paul started praying. There's power in praying. Jesus had taught them on prayer. It was in Matthew. He wrote the prayer down for them to always pray. And God stepped in. When he was in jail, he started praising God. He started praying to God, and God stepped in. The chains started coming off of him. The doors, the gates started opening up by itself. And they all could have ran out of there. But he knew they was gonna kill the jailer because they were supposed to protect him, make sure no jailers don't escape. And Paul was concerned that much to not run, but stay to save their man. So that's the story on hardship. The tools from Paul. Paul, and it's kind of, that's why I had said, that's why I say on pretty much all my practice, just because you're a Christian, we deal with the most hard time than ever. There was apostles, disciples from Jesus, and they dealt with so much hardship, especially since Jesus was gone. Jesus had the power to save them, but they had to try to save themselves, but they had to stay in the standards of God, for the continue on being that person that Jesus had sent them to be, trained them to be, and so these are the tools that Paul said, no matter what hardship you in, difficult time, no matter where you at. He was in prison and he still was praying. He was still praising. He was praising and praying so loud to everybody else that was in jail that was listening. That was feeling it. So you can pray. And it's a way that you got to deal with a spiritual behavior. Paul saying you have to have a spiritual behavior, when you're working under God. That's what Paul said. So that's the number one tools right there. You got to still be connected with God. You got to still, no matter where you at, hard, bad report, good report. So Paul's saying, no matter you got good days, you still got to pray. Bad days, you still got to pray. No matter because you're having a good day. No matter if everything is going good, bills is all paid, you still have to pray. Because if God see you don't need him no more, because everything is going good, this stuff's going to start happening. Because you under that shit. And if you feel like you don't need God no more, he going to open that up. And all kind of headaches going to start coming to you. So Paul's saying, in your good day, still pray. No matter what difficulties and hardship that you're in, Paul says, still pray. You got to praise your way through the hard time. We see that Paul went through it. He prayed his way through. We see Peter was in jail. I put that out before. Peter was the one that denied Jesus, but turned out to be a good prophet at the end. The church member had prayed for him, and God came through. There's power in prayer. So we also talk about the abortion. Abortion needs to be restored. We need to have legal abortion, for all women across the nation. They have to go to certain states to get the procedure done, and I need the procedure done for their own state, so they won't have to be traveling all over to try to get this done. They criminalized, the abortion in 1973, saying it was a crime. So you have all kind of complications that may happen while, this abortion needs to take place. It needs to be legal, without having this procedure done, with all these complications that I had listed, it will be life threat for all women. So, and it also have, they need access to health care, along with this, so, unban abortion, have abortion to be legal all across the nation, giving them access to health care, and restore Roe versus Wade. You know, women should not have to travel, to have this procedure done all over the world. You know, legal abortion for all women to have procedure done in their own state. So that's all the news and word that I have for you all today. Y'all have a blessed day, and I'll see y'all on the next video.